Thank you so much for the opportunity. I get so excited sometimes I forget. Danilo for being a perfect host in terms of when I've come to this country and just absolutely gave me everything, all the advice I needed and enough freedom to walk around too. And Vice Rector for proving that a person can multitask. She drove expertly, was a tour guide, and a great colleague to talk about teaching and learning. So very, very good. And so the rest of you, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here. Before I start, I have a quick question for you. When I want it off. If you don't have a clicker with you, if you ever are doing a PowerPoint and you need to get people's attention and you don't want them to read the screen, you just push the B. So, any key comes back, or you push the W, goes to white. But that's too bright. Thank you for coming. When you think of a didactic, I can't stand still. Sorry, I take this. Like this. Is this on now? Just turn it on. Okay, there we go. This will work. Is that on yet? There we go. So I got to move around, or I have to move. When you think of a didactic, a lecture, a student comes to the university, sits in a lecture room like this. How long do you believe it is the research shows before the average student is bored? How long?
20 minutes.
5 minutes, 20 minutes?
18.
1 minute? 2 minutes. This is where the pessimists sit. So I hear everything from 1 or 2 minutes up to 20 minutes. Anybody believe more than 20 minutes? The research shows. Anybody believe less than 1 minute? I had a friend one time who said, minus 30 seconds. That is like, I'm going to lecture, and I think, I'm going to lecture. Oh, it's a lecture. Okay. A student picks up a book and starts to read a book. Any book. Maybe one that's really, really good, like this one that I wrote. How long before a person, when they're reading a book, they start to read, they read a few sentences, how long before they are bored when they read? I hear more mumbling now. It depends on what? What would it depend on? The look of the book? Okay, how it's laid out. What else would it depend on? The purpose of reading, the content, how interesting, if it's written in an interesting way.
How do you feel when you're reading it?
Yes, how do you feel when you're reading it? And maybe if you're required to reading it. I have asked those two questions all over the world, and you know what is really strange to me? On the first one, everybody yells out numbers. And everywhere I go, it's between 1 minute for the people who don't believe in system and 20 minutes for the optimists who believe too much. But everybody yells out numbers between 1 minute and 20 minutes. And when I ask about the book, everyone says it depends. Every time. And the question I have is, why would it make a difference? It's the same thing. A lecture is a presentation that is given to you verbally. A book is information that's printed for you, and you read it. Why wouldn't people say, oh, in a book about an average of 5 minutes, or for a presentation, it depends on all these things. Everything that you said it depends on is what depends on the lecture as well. So the reason I started with that is I think we have to fundamentally change how we think about boredom in the classroom. We have to stop saying, what do we do to those students? Why won't they just pay attention? What's wrong with them? Because the students have no problem with attention span. If we think about how long it is before a person gets bored, How long can you attend to something? There is no limit. I see this every time I watch my children playing video games. They can play a video game for 2 or 3 or 10 hours. Sometimes I say, stand up, you're going to throw a blood clot, you must move. Or when you're thinking about a video, how long can a video be before people stop watching it? And I hear things like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, but I watched a video the other day that was 2.5 hours long, and it was very good. It's called a movie. It becomes a movie once it goes past a certain amount of time. If it's only 30 minutes, then it's just a show. But students all the time watch shows, they watch movies, they have no problem with that. And yet they have a video and they say, oh, it's 5 minutes, that's too long. It's too long if it's a cat playing a piano. Then you're done in 10 seconds. But if it's a really good presentation of material, it will be longer. Here's an idea for you. Maybe I'll go back to this one. I'm going to really make this tricky now. I'll put this down. I just realized he's videoing and I'm making it tough for him for the video because I run all over. Is that okay? All right. If I make a video and I go like this. Classical conditioning and psychology. Classical conditioning is an unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response pairing that occurs naturally. If you pair a neutral stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus, it will elicit a response that is similar to, but not identical to. I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. That was about 15 seconds, and you were done. I think when we met, I had a balloon with me, right? Classical conditioning. More interested now? All right, I'm not going to pop that because it's going to make too much noise. I could teach you classical conditioning by showing you the balloon and then asking you to talk to each other, or I could do a very boring presentation, or I could tell you a good story. So the point is, I'm going to move into this very quickly. I think we need to rethink learning and motivation, rethinking that. Students are motivated to learn all the time. Students actually have no trouble learning. Whether you're playing football or a video game or in a work situation, learning a new process, or sitting in a classroom. All of those are situations in which people can be learning. But there's something that this shares. The students really want to learn. You know, it's almost as if we took humans who are natural learning machines and put them in the worst possible situation, sitting in hard chairs, in rows, and telling them to be quiet and listen. That's a terrible situation, and here we are. I hear all the time about passive learning. You can't learn by having people sit back passively and just processing information. But this is because of the way the information sometimes is presented. And so the issue is students want to learn all the time, but your brain is wired in a very interesting way. Your brain is wired, it's all hooked up to look for the most interesting thing it can find. If the most interesting thing it can find is to think about lunch, then that's what you'd be thinking about, which many of you were not thinking about until right now. If the most interesting thing is a fire that's happening, I took that picture of a fire, I thought, I wonder what's going on with the fire, so I was very interested in that. Or walking in Times Square, New York. If that's what's interesting me, that's what I'll pay attention to. So if I teach a class and I'm the least interesting thing in the room, the students are not going to be motivated because they're going to look for something more interesting. That doesn't mean I have to be an entertainer. It means I have to do something that makes the information interesting. Otherwise, we have problems. All the time, if you think about it, all of us have times when we have to learn and it's boring. And then what kinds of learning do we have that is interesting? And I think too often that we forget our natural experiences when we somehow teach at a university. We just think students should just naturally be interested, especially in me. And after you're naturally interested, you should pick it up. But please keep this in mind. When you teach a class, you should be the most interested person in the room on whatever that topic is. If you are not the most interested in that topic, you should teach something else that you are interested in. Because if you have no interest in the topic, neither will your students. But keep this in mind. It is a topic that you have found very interesting, but they may not find it interesting yet because they're still a novice. You didn't necessarily love your fields as much as you do now when you first started. When you first started, you didn't love it this much. You came to love it this much the same way you come to love a spouse. I've now been married for 36 years. I thought she was pretty fascinating when I first met her, but I really learned so much about her through the years. Now she is absolutely amazing, but that's after years and years of learning. I think when students sit down in a class like psychology or biology or physics, they don't know the nuances, they don't know the stories, they don't know the things that you love. So you cannot figure out how could you not be interested? What's the matter with you? Well, the problem is they haven't learned yet. So our job is to get them to that spot where they can love it as much as we do. Now, keeping in mind as we do this, and this is just an introduction, the afternoon is the real show. So those of you who signed up for my session, you get some really fun stuff. The rest of you, good luck. Just kidding. All good sessions. But there are many, many approaches. I mean, we've already talked about lecturing a bit, didactic. But one of the problems that I have right now in education, I wish we would stop calling it or talking about a lecture or a didactic. There's so many kinds. I have a book out and we talked about 12 different kinds of lecture. Point-by-point lectures, Socratic lectures, lecture discussions, problem-solving lectures, formal lectures. All of these are different types of lectures. The research is actually very clear, by the way. There is only one type of lecture that is totally ineffective. And that is the one where a person stands behind this lectern and simply reads off a page for an hour and a half. That does not work well. Everything else, storytelling can work extremely well. We have to make sure that we understand the difference between training versus education. And I'm not a big fan of people who say, oh, this is education, it's not just training. Training is important too. If you have to operate a piece of machinery without losing a finger, something my family had to learn. My family is all factory workers. They all worked in factories and farming. In factory work and farming, you get trained on the equipment or you lose appendages, you lose hands. In this classroom, we would not want to do training, we would want to do education. I'm hoping this session right here is education, not training. So that's where we have to make a difference. And there's a difference between teaching and learning. For so many years, the focus has been on teaching. How do you teach well? How do you teach? I teach statistics, I teach research methods, I teach history of psychology. Now I have shifted and we talk more about learning. My students learn the value of understanding variability in a statistics course. My students learn different things. And so we think about learning versus teaching. And one of my favorite ways of knowing the difference, if you are focused as a teacher, oh, and by the way, I should say this. Teaching is not what is important at all. I was going to say this and I will discuss it with anyone. I don't care about teaching, I care about learning. You see, there's an old joke. A child walks up actually to a man walking the dog and says, hey, mister, I'll bet you $20 I can teach your dog how to talk. And the guy says, okay, I'll take that bet. And the little boy says, okay, doggy, whenever somebody talks to you, you just say, thank you very much, that's a nice conversation. And then you look up at the guy and say, you owe me $20. And the guy says, wait a minute. And he walks up to the dog and he says, hello, dog. And the dog just looks at him. And he says, you didn't teach him anything. He says, yeah, I taught him, he just didn't learn. There's a difference between teaching and learning. In fact, a friend of mine has a quote that I very much like. He says, teaching without learning is just talking. So the concept here is we have to think more about learning and less about teaching. How do you know if you are focused on learning versus teaching? The biggest thing for me is this. If you teach the same way you always teach and there were no students in the room, is that possible? And if you say, well, yes, I could stand up here and lecture. I like to look at faces, but sure, I could lecture for the whole class period. Then you're probably focused more on teaching. If you look at that and say, wait a minute, I couldn't possibly teach the class if there was no students in it because the small group activities, or when I ask for responses, or when I say, what did you come up with? What would I do for those times? Then you're more interested in learning. So the concept is we need to make that shift. I put that up there because I thought it looked nice. Now, when we think of motivation, there's a lot of things that go into play. We have to attend to things, we have to focus on things, we have to think creatively. There's much that has to happen here. And when I mention motivation, I do want to let you know I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. That is my education. In fact, I am an industrial organizational psychologist who works in the Department of Family Medicine. So I am working in a hospital as a psychologist, and I have a second appointment now in the veterinary school. So I work with animals and I work with humans, but mostly this is how I was trained. This is industrial psychology. When we want to motivate somebody, we have to find out what is their need, what do they need, what behavior can happen that then makes them happier. Well, that's a pretty simple one. So when a student comes in the classroom and plops down and says, I hate to take a statistics course, and I say, I hate to teach students who hate to take statistics courses, we know we have problems. So I have to figure out how can I teach a course that somehow meets the need. And sometimes the need is to feel successful. I feel like I'm doing well. That's a good need. And if you can work a problem and get the right answer, that's good. I will tell you, I've been teaching statistics for 31 years. I love statistics. It is the only class I have ever taught where students will dance to get a C. They're so happy just to pass the class. Everything else, they want high grades. Stat students, low grades are okay, just pass the mark. There's other aspects of this though. That was a simple motivation theory, and I just have a few others I'm going to flip up here. Sometimes it's reinforcement. You do something and then something happens. We don't need to worry about details. The point is, there are lots of different theories. They get more complicated. This theory actually is a very easy one, but I'm turning off because I don't want you to read it. This one basically comes down to, what is the probability in my head that if I try, I'm going to be successful, I'll get what I want? If that probability is low, I'm not going to do it. If a grocery store is going to close in 3 minutes and it's 5 minutes away, and you think to yourself, I could jump in my car, I could drive really fast to the grocery store and get there 2 minutes after it closes, you probably are not going to go, because the probability of success is too low. If it's 5 minutes away and closes in 6 minutes, you start to say, if I run right now, drive really fast, don't get a ticket, I might make it. But the probability of success starts to change your motivation. Are you going to go or not? So when students sit in the classroom, the probability of their success will change to what extent they're actually motivated. More about that later. The last one, just doing a few motivational theories here. This one actually talks about, and it seems more complicated than this, so I turned this off. This afternoon we'll do it in more detail, but this is it. This one boils down to this. I look at how much energy I put into something and how much I get out. If I study really hard and get good marks, that's a good trade-off. But then I compare it to somebody else. And if I see somebody else not study and get good marks, and I study hard and get worse marks, then I am dissatisfied and I'm demotivated. And students do this all the time. I'm not going to study for that test because, you know what, my friend just barely glanced at the book. He scored really well. I studied really hard in the last test. I got a bad grade. I'm not going to study. And people do this all the time. There's actually videos showing where chimps, small primates, are very happy when you give them a piece of cucumber, but they see that the next chimp gets a grape, and all of a sudden they're very angry that they have cucumbers. Well, I don't have a cucumber, I want a grape. That's with chimps. It happens universally. People are making comparisons all the time. I did not mean that our students are like chimps. It's different. They're not chimpanzees. All right, I got like a minute and a half left, and then we can ask some questions. This is the Fink's taxonomy, and all you need to worry about here is that the foundational knowledge up here, that is what teaching used to always be about. But we are finding out more and more that we have to teach our students how to apply the knowledge. They don't just know it. Just knowledge does not let them apply it. We have to teach them how to apply it. We have to teach them how to integrate it. And this whole side over here, this corner, we have to care. Or at the very least, they should think that we care. But we want to care how well our students are doing. And the very last part, and the one that I'm spending much time on right now, is teaching students how to learn. Of course they're not good at learning. They haven't learned how to do it yet. We can teach them that. We can be very good at that, or we can let them struggle. Most college students, most university students do not know how to read a university material. That is different from reading a novel. You pick up a novel and you read it one way, just a storybook. You pick up a calculus book, you read a calculus book very differently. But when I talk to my students, they read a calculus book the same way they read a novel. They'll just read it through very quickly and then they study. Say, no. So I will teach my students this. On the first of every semester, I will say, take all of the books that you've got from this semester, read 5 pages, and time yourself how long it takes you to read the 5 pages, but read them very carefully. If you find out that your psychology book comes out to 2 minutes per page, your chemistry book is 5 minutes per page, and your calculus book is 10 minutes per page, then you know that if you have 5 pages to read in calculus, it's going to take you an hour, but in psychology, you can do it in 20 minutes. Students don't know how to do that, and so they struggle. That's just a lot of information. You don't care. Here's where I'm going to end. For 900, almost 1,000 years, we've been lecturing. 1,000 years. Here's an image. How many of you have seen this image before? Anybody seen this image? No? Okay. This is a representation from 1,000 years ago. You know what I noticed when I saw this? 1,000 years ago, you have a person up here with knowledge. You have people here who want to learn. Look what happens 1,000 years ago. The eager people sit up front. The people having side conversations back here. You have the person sleeping. And I don't know how, but one guy texting.
I have read a comment where those on top right angle are fornicating.
No. They're not in the classroom. They wait till after. So if we think about the fact that teaching is the profession that makes all professions possible, everything is possible because of teaching, then 900 years later, how far have we made it? We're now here. So we do need to change. We need to think about what education's looking like and how, that was where I started, but how are we going to get students to move forward? We do that by motivating them in the classroom, and it does not come from me standing here and just reading off from a sheet. But it also doesn't mean that lecturing or didactic is a bad thing if it's done right. And I will finish with this, is that there's so many people now that I hear saying, the best thing to do is you lecture for about 10 minutes, and then after that you do an activity, then you lecture for about 10 minutes and do an activity. Have you heard this? Right?
Yes.
It's because, why would you do that? Why break it up? You're nodding your head. Why break it up? Do that. Because the students get tired, right? That is a terrible reason. It's not a good reason. Everyone says that. Everybody is saying that right now. And what I do not like about it is if you say you lecture for 15 minutes and then you do an activity because students are tired and they want to just have activities, and then you do another lecture and then activity, the activities start to feel like they're just a break. And with the activity is not a break. There's something in psychology called cognitive load. Once you have got your brain kind of temporarily full, you need to do something. So, if I lecture for 10 or 12 minutes about a topic that you do not know well, you're going to really be thinking hard. It's like when you teach someone a foreign language, after like 5 words, it's like, okay, wait a minute, I need to practice. So what happens in a class, I lecture for about 10 minutes until their brain is full. Then we do an activity so they can do something with the material. Then I can teach them some new stuff, and then they have to do something with it. The activities are not the break. It's the glue that holds everything together. And the reason I have to say it that way is when somebody says, I have so much content, I don't have time for activities, it makes sense if the activity is the break, but it makes no sense if the activity is the glue. So what we need to do is to motivate our students by being good teachers and keeping them engaged in a process where the learning is the most interesting thing in the classroom. And if we can do that, then I don't have to worry about, and I do know with Generation Z, there are very different kinds of students coming along, but truthfully, every generation that comes along is different. My grandfather talked about how my grandfather was from the Louisiana area. He moved to the United States. I'm second generation U.S. But he talked about the kids these days and how they just have no respect. And I remember my grandfather getting to an age where he'd say, you kids get off my lawn. And I've got about 5 more years and I will be old enough to say, you kids get off my lawn. And they don't care about learning. They do care about learning. But we have to make them care about our stuff that they're learning. And I will finish with this. They are not us. We are different people. We are teachers. We love everything about learning. If you do not love everything about learning, you should not be in this room. Not all students are like you. Some of the students will want to learn and then they will go live their life not as teachers. So we have to help them, but we can't just assume that they will be like us and love learning. I wish they were. I think sometimes they wish they were. But that's their life. This is our life. We have to do the best we can to help them. So I will stop. Oh, look at that. I did it. I had 30 minutes. This has only been 28 minutes. So I can take 1/2 of a question. I should stop. I'm going to stop there.